Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me a friend, Kimberly Britton. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to you being here for a while.
Well, I have been looking forward to it.
It's been a crazy summer, though, so probably more for you than for me.
And it's over, really. I mean, we're moving on to the fall, and the holidays will be here before we know it.
Yeah, which I'm looking forward to. A lot of people said, I'm hearing people say this summer didn't seem quite as restful as they remember previous summers being.
Oh, I don't think so.
So I'm not sure what changed.
I think it's because of the heat.
Yeah, it could be.
It just sapped us all.
It could be. Just before the show, you were saying you were in a workshop the other day and had an epiphany. So I'd like to jump right into that if you don't mind. And
Would be happy
go from there.
You know, I spend a lot of time in my space talking about, how you lead, how you manage, how you strategize, and then implement that strategy. That's sort of the world I live in. And so we've been working with a client on a rollout of a new process for not only allocating staff, how they identify positions that need staff, how they prove it. And so we were setting some levels of service expectation kinds of things, how quick are they going to do something or how often and so forth. And then we're going to, talk about how they set their key performance indicators, their KPIs, and then their SMART goals. But in doing that, the other thing I realized is one of the groups I was talking to was a mid-level management group. And I don't know about you, I started, while I was preparing for that group, I started thinking about back when I was doing this. It was a while ago.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, I'm a veteran now of those days, and I've been a CEO for a while, but it's still fresh on my memory. I worked in a big enterprise organization, a hospital district. We had a very intense patient population, many of them poor, and most of them were poor, in fact, and didn't have a lot of resources. So as you might imagine, the demand was extremely high, like it is in many business situations, and the resources were sometimes challenged in terms of how they were allocated. But one of the things I had to learn to do if I was ever going to be effective within this big organization was how to have some kind of control or say in how things got done. And so as I was talking to these managers, I had that feeling because they're going to come in that room going, well, my executive tells me what I got to do, and then I've got employees that are demanding stuff, and I'm caught in the middle here, and I feel like I never have enough time, I don't have enough bandwidth, and I certainly don't have a big enough budget, and I don't have enough staff. So, but how can we do this? And so my husband, Gary, who is an executive coach and a consultant, and that one thing we talk about is a philosophy of how can we. Look, there's lots of things, there's lots of headwinds, there's lots of constraints that we have in our life that keep us from moving forward in the direction we know we must go. That said, one of the things that I've learned to do is to, if I can't go around it or, I've got to figure out how to tunnel through it or I've got to work within those constraints, how can I be successful? How can I do this in spite of what's against me? So I worked with them to try to get them in that mindset before we begin to have this other conversation, which I'm about to share with you. But one of the things that I talk to them about is, okay, let's say you are in your position here. You're not at the top, you're not at the bottom, but you've got to be effective. How can you? One of the things I've learned is the first principle that I taught them was appeal to authority. Because, there's a couple of approaches to authority, right? There's more than one. There are some people who are very didactic. They're very forceful. This is my way or the highway kind of leader. And if you've got one of those, it's tough, right? You have to be brave because you have to be able to walk in there and speak the truth to them diplomatically and hopefully have a good outcome. And so one of the things I was saying to them, but then if you also have a very reasonable leader, it's a lot easier, but you still have to be brave, right? Because you're taking a risk. But anytime your leadership is wanting to take a course of action that maybe a portion of it or all of it that you think is not in the best interest, because maybe the truth is our direct reports, the people who work for us always know something we don't know. And to be able to create an environment where they feel like they can come to you and appeal to you if a bad decision or maybe not the best decision has been made, that's a great leader who will allow that kind of thing. But I still tell them, you have an obligation that if you see something that could go off the rails or is not the best decision, you have to take those facts and appeal to that authority. And I promise you that 90% of the time, there's always that 10% where you could get retaliated against. You could get in trouble for it. They might tell you that they don't care, shut up, right? But most of the time, they will respect you if your appeal is well thought out, based on facts and data, that it's useful. Because sometimes I've had, and you had this, Joel, where people bring you their idea that's another solution that's just not tenable. And in part because they don't know everything you know as well as a leader. So there's that. So one is how to be successful in a place or an environment or in a role where you don't control everything. One is when something's not going the way it should be, you have an obligation, in my opinion, to go to that leader and make that appeal. So the next step that I talk to them about is influence what you don't control. And one of the ways I did that in that very big enterprise organization was to volunteer for stuff, right? Is that I saw, because I only was in, my departments were always small, 10, 12 people or less. And we weren't we weren't operations, we weren't nursing, we weren't whatever. I had to work really hard to gain visibility. And I did that by seeking opportunities to work on teams outside my department, to serve where other people didn't really want to do the task. I remember in a different role, while I was working at the hospital, I had taken a Christmas job at Neiman Marcus, selling, doing retail, which definitely got me to continue to further my career elsewhere, right? If you've ever, don't do that again. If you've ever worked retail, maybe some people love it, but it's a long day on your feet, especially when I was working full time and then going to the store in the evenings or weekends. But it was a great experience. And one of the things that when you're a part-timer or a holiday help, in a retail environment, I don't know if it's any different now, but pretty much the full-timers hate you because they're on commission. You're not on commission. You don't care. You're paid hourly to show up and do your job. But your colleagues, if you will, are particularly some of the women that I was dealing with, I hate to say that, who are working in very high-end couture departments and so forth. They didn't want me anywhere near their clients. And there, at the time, there was a philosophy at Neiman's, and it may be still in the case, that you can help, if someone is with you and wants to stay with you as a salesperson, you can help them with anything in the store, regardless of whether that's where you're working. So I had people I knew who would say, they would say, want me to go with them. You talk about the glares I would get. And so when I would do that, I decided that the cure for that, particularly for the people I worked with regularly, was I was going to kill them with kindness. And back then at Christmas, you were boxing. That's where you got your boxes. This is so old school. It's not even funny. But in the department, when you bought a gift and you wanted it boxed, you did the tissue and the boxing and everything for the clients, and you packed it up, or they took ever. And all you want to do is turn your sales at a very busy time, right? So I would go over if I wasn't busy, and I would box for the other salespeople. And at least they stopped being hostile to me. They were suspicious, but they stopped being hostile. And so what resulted from that is my supervisor, when it was time for me to stop working there, begged me to stay on. She was like, please, would you consider coming here and working full time? I was like, oh no, I've got to get out of here. But I appreciated the extra income for Christmas. But that said, it taught me a lot about, through service, through smart volunteerism, through making yourself useful. And the other place I learned that was that if you do the hard thing or you show up and you contribute to someone else's success, what happens is you're operating often in your own giftings. And, the word says that your giftings make room for you. And that's what I found time and time again. I became the exception. Well, we never had someone like you do this before, and a door would open. I would have I had the opportunity for a leadership position in I was 21 years old, but I was praying with people. Our church tradition was people go to the altar with prayer needs, and I would go to the altar voluntarily with people I knew, and at their request, of course, and pray with them over things. And I loved doing that. It was a really meaningful time for me. Well, the church leadership saw it, and my pastor saw it. And there were official deacons that would come to the altar and pray at certain times within a service for people, but they didn't have any 21-year-old single females at that altar. Sometimes their wives would come with them. But my pastor, who was the last person who I would have expected, asked me to be there with them and was very serious about the fact that he saw me in that same role, even though I was too young, theoretically. I was the wrong sex for my denomination. And it was just an unusual kind of thing. But because I gave of myself and I was able to have influence in a place, and that was just very non-traditional. I've seen it in my career. I've seen it in a faith-based situation. And so that's where I really talk to them about influence and how you exhibit influence in a way to achieve other opportunities. And you have to do it, obviously, with the whole heart.
That's brilliant. I want to pause there just
please.
for a second. I'm reflecting back on my own career as you're talking, and I didn't maybe do it as purposefully, but I went straight out my first degree into Fortune 500 life, and I heard something early on about if you want to influence the outcome of a meeting, be the scribe. That's what we called it, was the scribe.
Yeah, you're taking notes,
yeah,
right?
the person taking notes. And but that was kind of our culture, our word for the person. Anyway, so here I'm at 20, 21, 22, I forget. But I started, and I had taken a few drafting courses, and my handwriting had always been pretty good anyway. And so back in those days, not everybody had email. And it was just coming onto the scenes.
Days.
Yeah, it was just coming onto the scenes. And if you're important, you had email, but the rest of us didn't, So because my handwriting was so good, at the end of the meeting, I'd read out the meeting minutes and the action items and everything, then run over to the copier, make copies while everybody wrapped up the meeting and distribute. And so that was the thing. But I volunteered to do that. Well, then I started getting invited to these different meetings because I was the scribe. And as time went, very quickly, being in the meeting, they go, well, Joel, what do you think? So here I'm with very senior management, very young age, and I just had decent handwriting and could take good notes. But I actually got to influence the meeting minutes, which means it was my interpretation that became the record.
I love it.
Of who's doing what, So
that's so smart.
It was such a little thing, though, and I never really put it together until you said about volunteering. You gave much more meaningful volunteer type things, but this was just a little thing that as I look back as you were talking, I was like, that one little thing of volunteerism. I did it for the right reasons. I only realized years later, and even today, I'm looking back going, oh, yeah, that's what that was.
Well, it does. It opens doors for you. But I think it's really important to share an example like that because I believe that folks think they have to do extraordinary actions in order to get seen. And honestly, sometimes it's really the more mundane, everyday things to do them exceedingly well. I will tell you, I routinely work with boards, and to have good board minutes it's somebody, you have to have a gift to do that because I've been through several people that struggle with taking content from a room. And that seems like a little thing maybe, but honestly to an executive who's responsible for producing those minutes or those notes or the outcome of something, it's absolutely paramount. And I think that was why often too, we think that we have to just, I don't know. It's got to be some grand gesture. And so often for me as an executive now, I'm looking for people who show up on time, who tell me the truth, who don't hide stuff from me, who are good teammates, who do what they say they're going to do. I mean, that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that, the learning piece will come, the greater experience and broadening. So I love that you shared that because I think it's good to help people just understand that you didn't even think about it. It was just part of your nature and who you were.
Mm-hmm.
So smart. So after I talked to them about, you appeal to authority, you influence what you cannot change. I said, then I would tell them, because I knew where their minds were going to be headed, it goes to money, right? I said, then creativity in a resource-scarce environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I have never, worked any place where resources of some kind were not scarce. Have you?
No.
Never. There's something.
Things always got denied at some point.
Exactly. There's either not enough budget or, like, for instance, I've worked in the public sector a lot. You're pursuing maybe federal grant money, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing you learn after years, particularly I was 22 years in healthcare and over the grant piece along with fundraising and a few other things, the thing you learn is that over time, it's not that the government has less money to do, it's that the pockets of that money shift. And if you have to be smart and savvy and know where the money's going, so you know how to pull it down for the things that you're doing, right? So right now it's the Inflation Reduction Act, right? And so everybody's scrambling to figure out where those pockets of money are. Well, has the government always funded transportation? Yes, but they're funding transportation a little differently under that deal. So all that to say is that for someone somewhere now, while other people are going to be in the money, that there'll be scarcity for others. So just having that creativity when you have the shifting tides and changes of things. Sometimes the resource scarcity is time or the ability to find enough staff. I mean, you talk about trying to hire right now somebody who's competent at what you do and who will show up on time and have that character that you need is a challenge, right? People talk about hiring as a challenge. All that to say is that if you can, instead of going, well, we just don't have enough money, we can't do it, or we don't have enough X, trying to figure out a way to be creative. And I told a really silly story, but it mattered because one, I got what I wanted, and two, my boss was good with it. So when I started at the hospital, I was hired to be a community relations person, so kind of public relations kind of deal, for 3 of the state-funded grant programs. They were funded, it was one focused on helping people have better outcomes who have diabetes. And then there was a program for pregnant mothers and parenting moms who need to have better outcomes. So it's all about that. So our offices were not even in the main building of the hospital. They were in a basement of an adjacent building. You're getting the picture here. And they're at the end of the hallway by the door to the parking garage.
Nice.
Well, it was great if you parked a car there,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
But literally the last stop on the way out the door. We were across the hall from the oral surgeons. So I don't know if that means anything or not, but that's where we were. So this community health program, and it's this tiny, low-ceilinged office, and my office was the closet of all the offices, right? So it didn't have a lot of room. It certainly didn't have room for the 6-foot desk that was already in it. There was literally, I would have to, ooch around the side to get it to the desk. So it was just untenable. Like if I needed somebody to come in my office and have a conversation. And so I talked to my boss, Barbara, and I said, if I can find a smaller desk for X amount of dollars, can I get it? And she's like, well, we really don't have the budget for it, but okay, fine. If you can find something, let me know. So I go to a used furniture store. And hey, my dad taught me well. I went to a used furniture store and I shopped and shopped, looked all over, and found the perfect desk. It was a 5-foot desk that was narrower, and it was like $200. And so I went back to Barbara and I go, can I buy this? And she said, yes, you can. And we had to figure out how to buy something outside of our purchasing process and all that kind of stuff. But I had a really nice looking desk. So everybody was a little bit jealous of me. But I'm like, hey, I took the initiative to go do that. Well, that's a silly story. But I got what I felt like I wanted or needed. And two, it was something that I did the appeal to authority about it. And we got that stupid 6-foot desk out of my office so I could live. We were there in that office space for about 2 years. So it was a good thing that I did. But just knowing that if you can come to your leaders with a plan, if you spot things that maybe if we tweak something, we can do more. I was talking to someone the other day and I said, you're going to see things that, look, if we escalated this and added, say it's a $2 million project, if we added $50,000 to this project, we could move us forward 6 months sooner. Those are the kinds of things that your leaders want to hear, right? And that I want to hear as an executive. And I think that's true. These principles that I've shared, obviously are applicable at any level, but they're particularly key when you're trying to rise up through the ranks.
You just modeled something that I also learned around that same time about being a scribe was if you want management to listen, you have to convert your story to dollars and numbers.
For sure.
And you gave that example. You said for $50,000, we can move it 6 months forward.
Right.
You got the boss's attention with just that statement, right?
Believe
now,
me.
they may want to say, okay, how is that? And give me more detail and color that in a little more and test it and doubt it and, whatever. But so often over the years when I had my consulting practice and especially prior to working with CEOs like I do now, but as I was working with teams of people, usually below the CEO, either the C-suite or lower, I would say, okay, how do we convert this story to a number or a dollar or both?
Right.
And they'd look at me like, but that has not, I don't know. They're like, well, we got to figure out a way because if we can't, they're not going to hear us.
That's for sure. Well, you've got to tell a quantitative story to get a qualitative outcome, right? I just think that people get that there may be positive feelings or outcomes or good results, but until they have the numbers, they may literally be constrained and not able to do anything. So I will tell you that client I mentioned when I started this, and I'm talking to these managers, the whole point what got us in that room was that their leader had been trying to figure out how do they make a really strong case to their public, whether that's an internal public like a board or it's a wider community sector. How do I make our case for when we charge more, right? Or when we need to do something differently? How do I prove it? And so that really is the point, right? But that conversation, and also if we need more people and need to hire them, how do I justify the fact that I need that? Well, if our stakeholders, internal or external, these important stakeholders are telling us they want us to achieve a certain level of service, we know we're at a 2, and they want us to be at a 4 in terms of intensity, right? 2 may be fine for this service, but maybe not for this one. So we're trying to make a leap. There's a delta we've got to achieve. If that's the case, then I've got to have a way to prove it up. So, but how do you do it to really wide audiences? Well, you start with, this is our current level of service. This is the aspirational service based on people who are telling us, right? Who have the loudest voice. And then, so that means to get to here, what is it going to take? Well, here are our performance measures. And then here is what kind of staffing that demands. And if you can do it that way and you can track it over time, there's a million ways to track that, right? This is one way. Then you have some ammo when you need to justify that, right? Now, it doesn't mean people are going to embrace it. It doesn't mean they're going to like it, but they cannot, if you've got the hard data, it's really hard to dispute it. And it helps you tell a better story, right? So anyway, so that's what I was trying to do with them. But I will tell you, that was a few weeks ago. Tuesday this week, I was working with the group that reports to those managers. Okay. So the assistant managers and supervisors. And I started thinking back about all of the cascade downhill toward them. And the kind of thing that I see executives on, the mistakes I see those executives make up the hill frequently. And I finally stated to this group, not that they can do anything about it, but I want them to know when they see it, they understand when they're seeing good behavior by an executive. And I said, and I had told some of the executive team this as well before I walked in that room. I said, an executive should be in a position to veto, to bless, or to redirect. If you're doing anything other than those things, then either you are poorly staffed or you are doing somebody else's work.
Say that again.
Okay. You can veto, you can bless, or you can redirect. And if you're doing anything else, you are either don't have the right people on the bus or you're doing someone else's job.
That's good.
It is good, isn't it? Didn't come from me. It came from, someplace else. But I will tell you, I had that revelation. I was standing in that room and I just said, you need to watch. Because if your executives are doing anything but vetoing, like you should be bringing them quality work and quality ideas and quality strategy so they can say to you, yes, that's great. Go do that. No, we can't do that right now. And this is why. The why is important. Or, hey, I like that. I like where you're going with that, but let's tweak this way and add and subtract. Or, potentially it could be not right now. We're going to postpone this, but we're going to do this in the next year. And I just see constantly, it's been really interesting to walk this journey because I deal a lot at the executive level with other people, right? My clients are mostly the CEOs, just like yours, right, at that level. But to cascade something through an organization, it really does take that two-way street, right? If you're that executive that's just pushing down, we know that doesn't work anymore, and the workforce is not going to put up with it. But the workforce has a responsibility. The leaders at the lower levels have a responsibility to have two-way communication, or they need to go work someplace else.
What do you think gets in the way of the two-way communication?
Behavior.
On both parties' part?
On both parties' part. But, you obviously, back to the issue of authority, is that one of the most important things that a leader at the top or the middle, wherever they are in the position of leadership, is the example that they set and the willingness they have of hearing truth about themselves. At the hospital, I had 5 CEOs in 22 years. You get used to it. And then you have the flavor of the month and they have their new initiative and their rollout. I knew it was time to leave when I just went, I can't do this again.
We're going to do this new thing for the 4th time.
Exactly. But I had a leader. He was tough. They were all tough in their own way, but he could be just rude. Let's put it that way. Okay. And this whole idea now, it would be very difficult for him to behave like he did then in the work environment we have now. Somebody would, threaten him and sue him or something. But he was pretty tough in terms of making it clear that you had to hold your own against him, if you disagreed or whatever. And he would hear disagreement and dissent, but you might pay a price for it. Honestly, you just had a very, very tough shell. But where his fatal flaw was not that. Interestingly enough, he was very good to me. He was just super tough on me. But he could not hear criticism of himself and change and evolve. Or, there's some criticism we receive that's just and some that's just simply not. It's based on misunderstanding or just people don't want to think the best of you. In his case, some of it was unjust, but much of it was truth. And it was more about style than about reality. And he could not accept that input and work through it. He always rejected it. At least his behavior did not indicate that he had taken that feedback and adjusted his behavior.
Sure.
Let's put it that way. And it ultimately cost his time, his career at that institution. But he taught me something really important with that bluntness when I stepped up to be a member. I worked from that lowly community relations position to be a member of the executive team in that 22 years. And when he looked at me and we were doing strategic planning, and he looked at me and said, I wasn't talking, I was hanging back because I was the youngest one and I was new to the table and I wanted to listen to what was going on. And he said to me, talk about influence, what you can't control. He looked at me and he goes, well, Kimberly, what do you have to say for yourself? And I said, well, Dave, I was, hanging back and I was waiting for, and he goes, if you don't have something to say, you don't need to be here.
Nice.
Nice. And really what he was asking me to do was comment on other people's plans.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're taking a risk with those who are in the room, your colleagues, these people you have to work with every day. So it's back to that whole thing of I don't control it. The other thing he made me do was set goals that I literally could not fully control the outcome of. Mm. So he would say, I'd say, well, that depends on making sure that those other people do their thing that they're going to have to do. And he goes, I don't care. It's your goal. You make sure they do it. So hard truths that really drove home that whole thing that I had been, softly trying to influence and appeal and, be creative. Well, now I had to get really, because the game, the stakes, everything, the pressure was much higher. Mm-hmm. So, it doesn't matter if you're a lowly community relations person or you're a member of the top executive team, you will see this again, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You'll have a board member or you'll have a boss or you'll have a company owner who will say to you, we know some people who have private equity investments and equity, but folks are telling them, you will do this and you'll do it by X amount of time, even though you don't fully control the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a lesson to remember and that those behaviors are useful, but at the core of all of it is that humility to know that you're going to be challenged and you have to respond correctly and remember what you learned at first.
In light of what you shared in the first part of this, the three things for the middle managers to really focus on, you've been all the way from the lowliest position now in an org chart, you're the CEO experiences. How's a good CEO or good leader, whether they're CEO or not, how do they help their team embrace those three principles you talked about?
Well, I will tell you, first of all, let me back up and say that for me, one of the things I learned when I was not in the key position, the top position, but I saw it after I became a CEO, is in order to be a good number one, you have to be a phenomenal number two. Because a good number two is watching their leaders back. They're making sure of the details. They're looking for pitfalls and blind spots. And so when you get to be CEO, then you know what you're looking for in your people, right? And in this most recent iteration of my career, being the CEO of Epicenter, an energy innovation hub, an organization, we're small, and we're basically a startup, and I was able to build a culture from scratch. So I knew what I was looking for in my team. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted people, to be able to be autonomous, but who would be humble enough to get those redirections or that veto, and that they would be resilient in the face of adversity. Mm. And so what I need from them is to speak truth to me, but please do it diplomatically, and so that I can hear it and receive that input. But I do expect them. It's been interesting, even when we would, we'd have our all hands meeting every Monday, all hands, 8 people, right? And we always included the interns and the assistants and anyone who was working at Epicenter. And part of the idea was, as a startup, as this organization, we all have a stake in our outcomes. We serve each other, we support each other, and if you've got bandwidth, you go help that person who may be overwhelmed. And then moreover, constantly transparent with them. If things are not rosy, without bringing a burden to them, mm-hmm. I expect them, though, to help share that burden. Mm. The financials are challenged. Well, then they know exactly where we stand. There's no secrets. And I honestly think that's the mistake that a lot of executives make, is they're worried if their people find out stuff that they will be, I don't know what, they think the world will end or it will be destructive to the morale or whatever. I think what's destructive is feeling like something's going to happen and I don't know. And I don't know how it's going to impact me. Because I guarantee, I remember the hospital was like that. It was very, very opaque. And we would freak out when we knew a new org chart was coming out. I literally would sit at my desk and keep refreshing my email because, I sat at this very precarious position as the head of the foundation and as a person who raised money, even though I was on the executive team. At any minute, I could be thrust into the masses, right? And I would wait. And that's awful. People should know, look, we're reconsidering this. This is why we're thinking about it. What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. We're looking at a reorg. How would you think it should be reorged if you were doing this? Mm-hmm. The thing you find out is if people have some influence or control, even if you don't do it the way they wanted you to do it, they're much more likely to accept the outcome. Okay, they know that leadership has let them weigh in and have their say. Not 100%, but it's better.
I'd love to hear your experience in this, but I found that the leaders that would hear me, whether they agreed with me or not, I was happier to follow.
Yes. In a heartbeat. And when they mess up, you're more likely to come back to the table than not. Mm. I'll give you 2 examples from me. Things I did well and things I did not do well. Years ago, at that same hospital, it was a long stint in my life, so there's a lot of colorful stories to tell from there. I'm not a person who loses my temper frequently, especially now, right? I'm more mature. But then I think I didn't quite know how to moderate when I got really angry about something as well. But most of the time my team would not see me blow up. It was never like, But one day my assistant did something that really, really angered me. And I lit her up. And I lit her up in front of other people. And she deserved it, actually. But I shouldn't have handled it like that. And that ripped it with some of that team. And there was, because they took offense at what I did to her, even though she did wrong and she deserved it, didn't matter. Didn't matter whether I was justified or not. I ripped the relationship with 2 of my team members, definitely. That planted a seed of destruction that showed up 2 years later. And damaged if it were not for the Lord God Almighty, it would have totally damaged my career reputation. Mm. Because then it wasn't even that they had anything real, but the offense was used to create fiction. Mm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so I paid such a huge price. I learned that it doesn't matter if somebody deserves it. You do not handle it like that. And I can genuinely say I have never done that again. Now, I've lit up a vendor like that. But never after that. And it's very rare for me to be that upset or angry. Mm. What upsets me is when I feel that someone is disloyal or they've lied to me. Those 2 things or they're just withholding from me. That really, really bothers me. And so fast forward many years later, thankfully, I had an opportunity with a team member last year. And I spoke a little bit harshly because I felt there was I couldn't feel confident in that I felt like that they had disclosed to me everything that they needed to disclose, that I needed to know. And it felt like disloyalty to me, and it was not. But I did not handle it as well as I could have. Mm. And so thank God that they're a person of goodwill, and we have had a really good rapport prior to that, because I did ask her to forgive me, but she's also the kind of person that I needed to give time to and some space. And so we were able to do that. And then out of that, it's lesson learned for both of us. But I also learned, I think, to trust her even more. Like, for instance, because some people are more transparent, and some people are a little more inscrutable, right? You can't read them as well as others. And so people who are a little inscrutable, sometimes, if I feel like we're in a high stakes situation, I get a little nervous about it. Well, because I'm very good at reading people. It's like what I do. It's my thing, And so for me to have a situation where I can't see through something to the other side, and plus I, for whatever reason, may have been feeling stressed. But you know what? We are all going to fail. We fail every day. We behave badly. We think poorly of people. We assume ill intent when we shouldn't. There's a million of those things. But honestly, you may fall 7 times, right? Scripture says, but
as you get up,
as long as you get up.
It sounds like you've done it on at least 1 or 2 occasions.
Just 1 or 2.
Apologize to your people.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of leaders nervous to say, I'm sorry, or I screwed up, or I was wrong. What's your thoughts on that?
You've got to say it, because if you don't, it's so funny. I have this other team member who you can almost not offend her. She's literally almost unoffendable, which is awesome, right? But you also know when you behave badly. And so there have been times where this happened a couple of years ago where we were new in our working relationship together, and I felt like I was harsh and about something, the way I put it, and I could have done better. And it was what it is the Lord was really niggling at me, right? Because honestly, I'm accountable to Him as much as I might be accountable to other people. That's where it starts. Even if that person is not offended, but I know I behave badly, I have to clear the air. That's me. I have to. So I went, knocked on her door, and stuck my head in and said, hey, listen, I'm sorry about that. If I was kind of harsh, I felt badly about that. And she went, about what? So the point was, it wasn't her. It was me. But I had to own that. And what it did was it builds trust, and it builds also affirmation for you as a leader, because they'll go, I didn't think you were harsh. And if you were, or you misspoke, or you just handled something poorly, they'll go, oh, well, yeah, okay, I understand, thanks, And then sometimes they won't say anything, and you'll get no feedback. And you have to be okay with that, because again, your ultimate accountability is not to them.
Did you ever have leaders apologize to you?
That's a really good question.
Because you talked about you grew up in some old school circles.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember. I'm sure I had a boss once that was super lovely. I think they wouldn't have said, I apologize, or I'm sorry. I think they might have said, God, I'm really trying to think about this. I'm running through my list of all my bosses in the past. That's such a great question.
Well, while you're thinking, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a number of years ago. I was working with a worldwide nonprofit, and I worked directly with the senior person. And I get this call one morning driving to the office, and it's this person, and he says, Joel, I just want to apologize for what I said yesterday. I'm like, sir? He goes, when I said about so-and-so, I was like, honestly, I thought it was kind of funny. I didn't take it. This is what I'm thinking, right? I didn't take it but he goes, I've just come from my quiet time, and I felt like that was not how I want to be as a leader.
That's great character.
Yeah. So my respect, is he perfect? Way from it. We're still friends, even though I don't work with him directly anymore. But my appreciation for who and he's done it on several occasions over the 20 years I've known him. So what I do know is, even if here's my takeaway from that. We have enough of a bank account built now, right? That even if he were to be offensive toward me, I'd say, one, I probably wouldn't take it that way. But if I did, then I have all of those instances to look back on and go, he is a person that's sensitive enough that he may at some point come apologize. And there was something, almost a year went by, and he pulled me aside in front of a couple other senior leaders, and he said, I didn't see it then, but I was wrong and you were right.
Wow. That's powerful.
And that even that changes the whole dynamic.
It does.
And I've had a few other leaders in my life that were willing to apologize, but this individual's really good at it.
Yeah.
But he's also runs a worldwide organization, so he's able to get the job done.
For sure.
And he knows what he wants, and if you make your case and appeal, and he'll listen, but and you can probably even hear it in the tone of my voice. There's so much more appreciation for him as a human being, because it didn't diminish him in any way when he came to apologize. It actually raised,
elevated him. Well, and I can tell it still impacts you to this day as you tell a story. It's clearly very meaningful to you. And I think that's why it is an exception, right? We often don't have leaders who will come to us and say, I'm sorry. I can tell you in other environments, maybe not my work environment, but the pastor I mentioned to you that had given me an opportunity to be in that unusual leadership position, he and I had a moment, and he was not nice to me publicly in a church meeting. And it was based on some misinformation that he had. And one, it messed him up with some people in the congregation, because I was a child of that church, big time. I mean, we'd all been there long before he was there. And, he was in a bit of trouble with some of the ladies who are very,
motherly
and powerful, frankly, in that church. And so in fact, his own secretary knew that he was wrong. And so she straightened it out. That was part of what the deal was. But it cost him, because he attacked me publicly. I say attack. It wasn't like he berated me, but he did something that was embarrassing and difficult to get past. So I forgave him. And so when he started asking me to serve in this leadership role at the altar at church, that was a couple of years later. And to me, it was like he had said to me in a not really touchy-feely way, he had apologized to me for that other thing. He did make it right. And then publicly at a church situation, he did say that he was wrong. He didn't call me out by name, but he said that thing that I said that was incorrect, and this whatever. So he redeemed it as best he could. And even then, because that's awkward, right, as a pastor of a church to kind of those kinds of things can be very volatile. It did teach me, in this odd sort of way that two things is that, one, I wasn't going to hold that against him forever. He was my pastor, and I didn't like him very well. He wasn't a person that was easy. I ultimately came to like him, but I respected him, and I was not going to hold bitterness, and because I knew that was of no benefit to me or to the church or to him, and would be disobedient to my faith, right, to the Lord. So I think I have had leaders over time model it, even imperfectly for me. But I also know it will hound me until I make that apology. I just have too active a conscience to let that stuff. And I literally did it. I have a client that I did it with the other day. He was seeking counsel on an employee situation. And you know how, I know you know this, when you're telling someone and you've had vast experience, both in the workplace and in the spiritual workplace, you know how this is going to turn out. And I looked at him and I go, you will be firing that person soon. And I went, that was not my place to say that. But I know that's probably, I said, well, and he looked back at me and goes, or they'll fire themselves. Yes, that's probably true. But overnight after that conversation, I texted him the next morning and I go, again, I'm sorry if I, spoke too harshly about this person. And I, I know you'll do great and how you handle this and all that stuff. And he was like, oh no, I need to hear this. So.
But I think when we have that demeanor, that we're still teachable, humble, correctable, all of those things, that we're still human.
Right.
To me, that everybody I've talked to, whether on this podcast or just through life, it seems to be a leader's biggest fear to say they're wrong,
For sure.
but it seems almost like their followers crave it,
They do.
and so for those, you used the word brave at the beginning of the podcast, and I love that word. In fact, I've got somebody I'm going to go compliment with that word
Good.
later. But when leaders are brave enough to say, I'm sorry, it almost takes away everybody else's excuse not to.
Yes, it does. Well, it makes for a really, the work atmosphere changes when a leader is willing to be vulnerable like that. It's hard. The workplace is hard now. There's so many people are so hungry for work-life balance. And I think it's less about workload than it is about work dynamic. We need some freedom to be able to function in a way that you can do over time. There's so much where the demands of what you have to do. People said to me one day in one of those training sessions, they said, "Do you believe in work-life balance?" I said, "No, I don't." Do I believe you can have appropriateness in your work and life?
Appropriate priorities.
Yes. And, from what I understand, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but in the Jewish tradition, you don't separate those things. Your faith, your work, your home life, it's all part of one big continuum. And for me, I'm a Christian at work, and I'm a worker at home, right? Or wherever. I am, it's all of who I am as a whole person. I bring that to whatever I'm doing. And I feel like if they're looking for some kind of scales, which is what that implies, right? That you would have these scales that will come into balance with your personal life and your work life being in balance. I don't see it happening. Have you ever had that happen? Never. There are times when you have to be a mom. You got a sick kid, or you've got a priority, you got a troubled something going on, or you've got to be a leader of a department. And you've got to give it because you've got a set of reports or something that you've got to, and as we say, an ox to get out of a ditch, right? Those times of intensity happen. The question is do you return to some kind of equilibrium, appropriateness, so that you make sure you're serving and you have a support system that you either have been fortunate enough to just have, or you have cultivated around you. And those are the things that make you be appropriate in terms of your behavior in your life.
And just to disclose a little personal transparency here, one of the things I wrestled as a young dad is I'm climbing the corporate ladder and getting accolades and successes and promotions and attaboys and successful projects and moving dollars to the bottom line and growing teams and all this, and going home and being a dad that I don't really know how to do that well. I'm not that good at, still jury's still out if I was or wasn't, but go home and not get any accolades for being a dad. And so I found in my own life, I wrestled with, I wasn't really looking for work-life balance. I was being, my ego's being stroked over here, and I go home and at best I'm an average dad, So, sorry, honey, I got to work 100 hours this week over here where I'm getting, recognized and rewarded, and I don't have to fail over here.
Right.
But then years later, I'm realizing now I flat out failed over here. My daughters don't hate me, but they certainly don't, look forward to me coming home. Right. My son and I weren't as close as we were the younger years of his life, and my priorities started changing. But I can imagine, other leaders being out there that it's easy to be drug into or willingly, in my case, willingly go into, let me absorb forget balance. This is where I'm thriving and feeling honored and respected and whatever, recognized, or I can go over here and change diapers, so.
There's no thinking about that. Yeah. Having a certainty about it. Well,
But my point is, things of the world can be, and I don't mean world as in like in a spiritual context. I'm talking just life. There are things in life that are very attractive,
right,
and there's other things in life that are work. And sometimes we flip those.
We do.
And that's where I don't think it's work-life balance, like on a scale, equally balanced. Here's my home life, here's my work life. I think it's a matter of priority, mindset, attitude.
Right.
You know, am I escaping over here so I don't have to be over there?
Well, I think one of the best things, I mean, there are horrible things that we're still dealing with that came out of the pandemic, right? But I think one of the best things it did for us was kind of realign how we think about our work and our life, and that how it works much better for me because, you know, I like being able to go throw a load of laundry in and then go back to my desk. You know,
A memo.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I love doing that and having the ability just to keep my entire life moving forward. I've always been a little bit that way. Now I love that it's more common than it used to be. There's still plenty of exceptions. And of course, now you have these executives that often, for their own ego stroke, let's be honest, the studies show this, CEOs are wanting all these people to come back to the office. So they have this circle of control and eyes on and all of that without understanding how they create really productive hybrid work environments. It's more draconian rather than for real need. And so that's one I actually am working with a client on that project right now. So
that sounds like another fun topic for another time.
It does.
But thank you for being here today. I think we're probably ought to wrap it up here.
Yes.
We've got a lot of good stuff that you've shared, and really an honor to have you here today.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor to be here. It's been fun.
Appreciate it.
You bet. You too.